wealthy businessman Richard Blackwood thought he knew everything about his daughter's condition, until one moment shattered that belief. Standing in the doorway of the nursery, he froze. His 6-year-old daughter, Isabella, was singing a French song with a clear, angelic voice. Beside her sat Keisha, the nanny he had hired reluctantly, playing the piano. For 2 long years, Isabella hadn't spoken a single word. Specialists across New York had declared she might never find her voice again. Yet here she was, singing as if she had been waiting for this moment all her life. "What is going on here?" Richard thundered. Isabella instantly fell silent, eyes wide with fear, while Kesha rose from the piano bench. "Sir, I can explain," she said calmly. Richard stormed into the room, his anger filling the air. "Explain how you managed to make my daughter talk when the finest doctors said it was impossible." In her 2 months working for the family, Kesha had learned a bitter truth. Richard saw his daughter less as a child and more as a problem to be fixed. He had spent fortunes on therapists who treated Isabella like an experiment, but never once had he tried to simply connect with her. "Mr. Blackwood," Kesha replied, gently resting a hand on Isabella's shoulder, "your daughter has always been able to speak. She chooses when and with whom she shares her voice." Richard laughed bitterly. "She's practically mute, and you, a nanny without medical training, claim you've achieved in weeks what experts couldn't in years?" "I didn't cure her," Kesha answered firmly. "I listen to her. She tells me stories every day. She speaks 3 languages and plays 4 instruments." "Lies," Richard spat. "She can barely communicate." Then, in that tense silence, Isabella did something extraordinary. She stepped forward, looked her father straight in the eye, and said with quiet strength, "Daddy, I do talk. I just don't talk to people who don't want to listen." The room fell still. Richard's face turned pale as if he'd seen a ghost. The words pierced him like a blade. For the first time, he saw his daughter not as a fragile burden, but as a brilliant, misunderstood child. But pride would not let him admit it. His voice hardened again. "Keisha, you're dismissed. Leave my house immediately." "No!" Isabella cried, clutching at her nanny's dress. "She understands me. You don't." Richard ignored his daughter's tears. "You've influenced her somehow. I won't allow it." Kesha stood tall, her calm gaze holding a quiet defiance. "As you wish, Mr. Blackwood. But before I go, Isabella has something to show you, something that may change how you see her forever." "Can I at least explain what I've discovered about Isabella these past 2 months?" Kesha asked. "There's nothing to discover," Richard snapped, cutting her off as he ended the call on his phone. "My daughter's condition was diagnosed by top professionals. You're not a doctor. You're not a therapist. You're just a nanny who taught a few tricks to a confused child." That single word just hung in the air like a slap. What Richard didn't know or didn't care to acknowledge was that Kesha Johnson had graduated with honors in child psychology, spoke 4 languages, and specialized in cognitive development and trauma. But to him, she would always be just the cheaper nanny he had hired to save money. "Daddy, please," Isabella begged, her voice trembling. It was the first time she had spoken directly to him in more than 2 years. "Keisha taught me that I'm smart. She teaches me things the doctors never did." Richard didn't even glance at her. His cold eyes remained fixed on Kesha, the same look she had seen countless times from wealthy men who treated people as if they were disposable. "Isabella, go to your room. A new nanny will be here in the morning." "I don't want a new nanny," Isabella cried, clutching at Keisha's dress with desperate little hands. "I want Keisha. She doesn't treat me like I'm broken." What Richard did next stunned even Kesha. He lifted Isabella roughly, ignoring her screams, and handed her to Carmen, the housekeeper who had appeared at the door. "Take her to her room. Lock the door. She doesn't come out until I say so." "Don't leave me, Kesha. Please don't leave." Isabella's cries echoed down the hallway until the sound of the door locking cut through the air like a gunshot. Kesha stood still, her chest tight with fury. She had just watched a father traumatize his own child to protect his fragile pride. Richard turned back to her with a cold smile. "You have 10 minutes. If you don't leave on your own, I'll call security." Kesha had grown up in Brooklyn, the daughter of a bus driver and a cleaning lady. She knew exactly what it meant to be underestimated, dismissed, and spoken down to. But she also knew a truth Richard Blackwood had never learned. The most dangerous person in the room is the one you underestimate. "Mr. Blackwood," she said steadily, gathering her purse, "may I ask you one simple question?" Richard glanced at his gold watch with theatrical impatience. "Quickly, do you truly believe your daughter is incapable? Or are you terrified she might be far smarter than you ever imagined?" The question landed like a punch. Richard stepped toward her, fists clenched. "How dare you question my role as a father? I've spent a fortune on therapies, specialists, treatments. I've done everything for her." "Everything," Kesha said softly. "Except listen." She met his eyes without flinching. "Isabella doesn't need another specialist. She needs a father who believes in her." Richard laughed bitterly. Parenting advice from a babysitter in her 20s who doesn't even have children. What a joke. Without breaking eye contact, Kesha reached into her purse and pulled out a small digital recorder. "Over the past 2 months, Isabella has confided many things to me. She told me how it hurts when doctors talk about her as if she isn't in the room. How sad she feels when you cancel dinners because you don't want to be seen with her. How she once pretended she couldn't walk properly, just to see if you would notice her more." Richard's face drained of color with every word. "Your daughter is not silent, Mr. Blackwood," Kesha continued firmly. "She is brilliant. She has simply learned that silence is the only way to receive affection in a home where being different is treated like a flaw." Richard lunged forward and snatched the recorder from her hand. "You had no permission to record anything in this house. This is a violation of privacy." "Isabella gave me permission," Kesha replied calmly. "She wanted her voice to finally be heard, and that's only one of many recordings. Over 2 hours of conversations where she demonstrates advanced vocabulary, a love for classical music, and an emotional awareness that would astonish any professional." For the first time, reality flickered in Richard's eyes. He realized he had underestimated not only his daughter, but the woman standing before him. His voice dropped. "What do you want?" Kesha smiled, but it wasn't the smile of victory. It was the dangerous calm of someone holding the truth that could shatter his carefully built world. "I want you to stop treating your daughter like a failed experiment," Kesha said evenly, pulling another small recorder from her sleeve, "and start seeing her for what she truly is, an extraordinary child. But more than that, Mr. Blackwood, I want you to understand that some of the people you call just employees know how to document truths you've spent years ignoring." From the hallway, Isabella's muffled cries still echoed through the locked door. Her voice was a haunting reminder that at the heart of this battle wasn't pride or power, but a 6-year-old girl begging simply to be understood. For the first time, Richard looked shaken. Behind the anger in his eyes was something Kesha recognized immediately. Fear. Fear of someone who could not be silenced with money. Fear of someone who held something he couldn't buy. The truth about what kind of father he really was. What Richard didn't see was that every insult, every dismissal, was only giving Kesha more strength. She had endured worse humiliations, survived harsher battles, and every act of contempt only sharpened her resolve. He thought he was winning. He didn't realize he was already losing. 3 days later, Richard believed the problem had been solved. Kesha was gone, and in her place, he had hired a new caregiver through the most exclusive agency in Manhattan, Margaret Foster, a 60-year-old woman with impeccable British credentials and, more importantly, the absolute discretion he demanded. Yet Carmen, the housekeeper, soon approached his office with unease. "Sir, Isabella hasn't spoken a word since the new nanny arrived. She refuses to leave her room, she barely eats, and when she gets upset, she makes those strange sounds again." Richard didn't even look up from his financial papers. That's expected. She'll adjust. Miss Foster is a professional, not some improviser. The phone rang, slicing through the room. Richard answered with irritation, but his expression changed the moment he heard the voice. Mr. Blackwood, David Martinez and Associates. I represent Miss Kesha Johnson. We have a matter to discuss, one that may be of interest to you. Richard waved Carmen out of the office and shut the door. His voice hardened. That woman was dismissed for cause. There's nothing to discuss. Interesting, Martinez replied calmly, because I happen to have a rather extensive dossier on workplace discrimination and patterns of child neglect. My client documented everything. This is blackmail, Richard snapped, though his voice wavered. I have the best attorneys in New York. That nanny can't possibly take me on. Martinez's chuckle was low, professional, and unhurried. Mr. Blackwood, perhaps you don't know who you're dealing with. Miss Johnson graduated top of her class in child psychology, specialized in trauma and cognitive development, and is currently pursuing her master's in children's rights at New York University. She also writes a professional blog on child development, followed by over 200,000 readers, many of whom are experts in the field. The silence on Richard's end of the line was suffocating. For a man who thrived on control, it was as if the floor had vanished beneath him. And then, Martinez continued, there are the recordings. Hours of your daughter, not only speaking fluently, but displaying an intellect and emotional insight that any psychologist would call exceptional. Recordings in which you, Mr. Blackwood, are also heard describing her as a lost cause and an embarrassment, statements that, I'm sure you'll agree, would not reflect well if made public. Richard's stomach turned. He remembered those conversations, the private phone calls, the careless words spoken when he thought no one was listening. His voice cracked. What do you want? For now, Martinez replied smoothly. Only a civil conversation. My client is not vindictive. She genuinely cares about Isabella's well-being, but she will not allow a brilliant child to be silenced by her own father's pride. Across town, in a small apartment she shared with fellow graduate students, Kesha sat surrounded by files, recordings, and photographs. Every interaction with Isabella had been carefully documented, not for revenge, but as part of her academic research on child development. Dr. Sarah Chun, her mentor at Columbia, listened with growing outrage as the recordings played. Kesha, this is extraordinary. Isabella doesn't just show above-average intelligence. She's developed sophisticated strategies to protect herself from constant emotional neglect. Her selective silence isn't an illness, it's survival. Kesha closed her notebook, her expression calm but resolute. She had always known Isabella's voice deserved to be heard. Now she had the proof, and the allies, to make sure it never faded again. I know, Kesha replied calmly. And the tragedy is that her father thinks he's helping Isabella by sending her to therapists who treat her like she's broken. What he doesn't realize is that he's causing damage that may never heal. Dr. Chun picked up one of the recordings and pressed play. A child's voice, pure and controlled, filled the room. Isabella singing a full Italian aria with flawless pitch. The professor's eyes widened. Kesha, with your permission, I'd like to present this at next week's Child Development Conference. It's the perfect example of how family bias can blind even the most educated people to a child's extraordinary potential. Not yet, Kesha said, carefully locking the files back into her case. Before the world knows. Richard Blackwood needs to know. He has to face the truth, that his daughter is not a problem to be hidden. She is a gift he's been wasting. Meanwhile, back at the Blackwood mansion, Margaret Foster was losing patience. At dinner, Isabella sat silently, pushing food around her plate without taking a bite. She used to be like this before the other nanny arrived, Richard explained dismissively to the new caregiver. This is her normal state. Don't be fooled by her little acts. But Margaret, a woman with 40 years of childcare experience, saw something Richard refused to see. The child wasn't incapable. She was traumatized. "Mr. Blackwood," she said cautiously, "in my experience, Isabella would benefit from a more personalized approach. She clearly possesses above-average intelligence. Isabella has clear limitations confirmed by experts." Richard cut her off coldly. "Don't encourage fantasies. That's exactly what the last nanny did. Filled her head with false hopes." That night, after Richard retreated to his office, Margaret sat quietly beside Isabella on the couch. She lowered her voice. "You don't have to speak if you don't want to, sweetheart, but I'd really like to know you better." For the first time in days, Isabella looked up. Slowly, she took a napkin, scribbled a sentence in neat handwriting, and handed it over. "Is Kesha coming back?" Margaret's heart tightened. She had cared for hundreds of children, but she had rarely seen such loneliness written in so few words. "I don't know," she whispered, "but I do know this. You are much more special than anyone here realizes." The little girl gave a sad smile and wrote another line. Kesha knew that. As Margaret processed the complexity behind those words, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Hello, Mrs. Foster. This is Kesha Johnson, Isabella's previous nanny. I know you're a professional, and you must already sense that something is deeply wrong in that house. If you'd like to talk, please contact me. Isabella needs us." Margaret looked at the child, asleep now on the couch, still holding the napkin with Kesha's name on it. For the first time in her long career, she asked herself whether staying in this home was helping or harming a child. Across town, Kesha was finalizing what she called Project Isabella, a comprehensive dossier of notes, recordings, and photographs. It wasn't only a case study of child genius, it was undeniable proof of years of emotional neglect. David Martinez had assured her they had a strong legal case, but Kesha wanted more than a courtroom victory. She wanted Richard Blackwood to stand before the world and admit what he had refused to see, that his daughter was extraordinary, because some men only learn when they lose everything. And Richard was about to learn that truth. 1 week later, Richard woke to a storm he hadn't expected. His phone buzzed with messages that made his blood run cold. The first was an email from the Department of Children's Services announcing an urgent evaluation of the Blackwood home. The second was a missed call from his attorney. The third was a text message. "Press conference today at 3 p.m. Columbia University Children's Rights Center. Your presence is recommended." KJ. Panic rising, Richard stormed into his office and dialed David Martinez. "What's happening? Why is social services investigating me?" "Mr. Blackwood," Martinez's voice was sharp, urgent. "You need to come to my office immediately. The situation is far more serious than we thought." An hour later, Richard sat in a polished conference room, pale and restless, as a large projector screen lit up. Dr. Sarah Chun, one of the nation's most respected experts in child psychology, stood at the podium. With surgical precision, she began a presentation that dismantled everything Richard thought he knew about his daughter. Slide after slide, video after video, showed Isabella speaking fluently, playing instruments, solving puzzles, and demonstrating a level of comprehension that no expert had ever uncovered, because none of them had cared to truly listen. And sitting in the front row, her eyes calm but unyielding, was Kesha Johnson. These recordings were made over 2 months by a qualified professional with the child's full consent, Dr. Chun explained, as the audio filled the room. Isabella's young voice soared, singing a flawless opera piece in Italian. As you can hear, she demonstrates not only rare vocal talent, but also advanced linguistic ability. This is clear evidence of giftedness. Richard's face drained of color. Still, he clung to his last defense. "These recordings were made without my permission. They're illegal." David Martinez leaned forward, his tone sharp. "Actually, they're not. Under New York law, educational documentation is permitted when there's strong suspicion of developmental neglect. And unfortunately for you, Mr. Blackwood, there's more." The next recording was played. Isabella's voice, fragile yet clear, filled the silence. "Daddy always tells the doctors that I don't understand things. He talks about me like I'm invisible. Yesterday he said on the phone that I was a bad investment, and maybe he should send me away to a special school." The words struck Richard like a hammer. He remembered that phone call, thinking no one had heard. "There are 17 hours of similar material," Dr. Chun continued steadily. "Isabella consistently displays high intelligence, emotional balance when treated with respect, and, tragically, an awareness of how her father views her." The screen behind her shifted again, this time showing Isabella's medical files. "Most disturbing," Dr. Chun added, "is the correspondence between Mr. Blackwood and her therapists. Emails where he explicitly requested they maintain certain diagnoses. His exact words, 'Make sure her disability status remains unchanged.'" Richard lurched from his seat, but Martinez forced him back down. "Sit, it's not over yet." The doors opened, and Kesha entered carrying a thick folder. Her face was calm, not triumphant, just the steady determination of someone who had prepared for this moment. "Mr. Blackwood," she began evenly, "for 2 months, Isabella confided in me. She admitted that she exaggerated her difficulties because she realized the more helpless she acted, the more attention she received from you. A 6-year-old child, forced to manipulate adults just to feel loved." "You manipulated her!" Richard shouted, his voice cracking. "You taught her to lie, to pretend she has abilities she doesn't." "Actually," Dr. Chun cut in, "neurological tests conducted this month prove Isabella has never had cognitive impairments. Her silence was a defense mechanism, a response to systematic emotional neglect." Kesha opened her folder, spreading drawings, musical compositions, and short poems across the table. "She didn't need to be fixed, Mr. Blackwood. She needed to be seen." "The doctors," Richard stammered weakly. "The doctors gave you what you paid for," Martinez replied coldly. "When wealthy parents insist on a narrative, many professionals bend to it, especially when that narrative keeps the checks coming." Then came the final blow. Dr. Chun pressed play on the most recent recording, just 3 days earlier. Isabella's voice, calm and articulate, filled the room. She was speaking with Margaret Foster. "What amazes me," Isabella said, "is how Dad never realized that I always knew he was ashamed of me. I pretended to be more limited because that seemed like the only way he would notice me." Richard sank back into his chair. The arrogance, the bravado, gone. His voice was barely a whisper. I just wanted to protect her. I wanted her to be normal, happy." "No," Kesha said softly, her gaze steady. "You wanted her to fit your version of normal. And when she didn't, you'd rather believe she was broken than accept that maybe your definition of normal was too small." David Martinez slid a thick document across the table toward him. "Mr. Blackwood, it's time you face reality. This is a petition. Custody arrangements, intervention measures, and, if necessary, public disclosure of every piece of evidence we've gathered." Richard stared at the folder as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. For the first time in his life, he was the one being cornered, stripped of power, and left with no easy escape. And in that moment, he realized that the person he had dismissed as just a nanny had quietly become the most dangerous opponent he had ever faced. "The Department of Children's Services is considering a supervised joint custody plan," David Martinez explained firmly. "Isabella will continue to live with you, but with mandatory psychological counseling. Not for her, Mr. Blackwood, for you." Richard's lips trembled, but before he could protest, Dr. Chun continued. "In addition, Isabella will be enrolled in Columbia's gifted program, where her talents will finally be recognized and nurtured. And Miss Johnson," she turned toward Kesha, "will be her official educational tutor." Richard looked at Kesha, eyes burning with anger, but beneath it was something else: despair, helplessness. For the first time in his life, money and influence meant nothing. "What do you want from me?" he whispered. "I want you to be the father Isabella deserves," Kesha replied simply. "I want you to see her not as a burden, but as the extraordinary child she has always been. And I want you to understand that sometimes the people you dismiss as just employees are the ones who see the treasures you've been blind to." David delivered the final blow. Today's press conference will present Isabella's case as a groundbreaking study in how parental bias can mask giftedness. Ms. Johnson will be formally recognized as an associate researcher at Columbia. Richard finally understood the scale of his downfall. The nanny he had despised was now being honored nationwide as the woman who saved his daughter's future. "Does Isabella know all this?" His voice cracked. Kesha's expression softened. For the first time, she smiled. "She helped plan everything. She told me, 'Daddy isn't bad. He just forgot how to look at me without being afraid.'" Those words, gentle, forgiving, spoken by a 6-year-old, broke Richard more completely than any court ruling. He realized then he hadn't been defeated by lawyers or by Kesha. He had been defeated by the love and wisdom of the very child he had failed to understand. 6 months later, Richard sat in the front row of Columbia University's auditorium, tears welling in his eyes. On stage, Isabella, now fluent in 5 languages, composer of 3 original pieces, was awarded the Medal of Honor for academic excellence. As she stepped down, she whispered, "Daddy, are you proud of me now?" Richard dropped to his knees, hugging her tightly, his tears finally free. "I've always been proud of you, Princess. I just had to learn how to see it." In the audience, Kesha Johnson, now a nationally recognized doctoral candidate and rising voice in child development, watched with quiet pride. Beside her, Dr. Sarah Chun applauded, while Margaret Foster smiled warmly as Isabella ran into the garden to play with other gifted children. Kesha's book, Invisible Children, How Prejudice Kills Potential, had become a bestseller, but her true victory wasn't fame or even justice in court. Her revenge was far quieter and far greater, transforming Richard Blackwood into the father his daughter had always deserved. Because sometimes the greatest victory isn't destroying those who wrong us, but saving them from themselves. If you believe that every child deserves to be seen for who they truly are, not for what others expect of them, subscribe to the channel. Because when we stop judging by appearances and start listening, really listening, we discover that the greatest treasures have been there all along.